In this video, we're going to show you to install brake calipers on your Nissan Frontier located behind your front wheels. Using a 21mm socket, go ahead, loosen and remove your lug nuts. Get to remove the wheel and set it aside. I want to go ahead and remove our brake caliper. We have two 14mm bolts here. We want to go ahead and loosen and remove these. I'm going to start with the bottom one. Go ahead and get that top one. Now I want to go ahead and separate the brake caliper from the caliper bracket itself. So I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver, go between the caliper bracket and the caliper, and just try and move this out. Just gently work this back and forth between the brake rotor and the caliper bracket. Now we have a caliper hanging tool here. You want to make sure when you remove this here, you can hang this caliper. You don't want the caliper to drop on this flex hose here. You can damage that. So go ahead and use the hanging tool, and then you can hook it up on the upper control arm or up on the frame somewhere to support this up and out of the way. Remove your brake caliper bracket by loosening the two 19mm bolts here. You can use an impact gun, or you can use your ratchet and socket. Now we got our lower bolt out with our impact gun, but for some reason the upper one was a little bit tighter, so we're going to switch over to our breaker bar here. Needs a little more leverage. Now with that loose, we're going to switch back to our impact gun and zip that off. Be sure to hold the caliper bracket when you remove this bolt, otherwise this is going to drop and it could hit you in the foot. Slide this off. Probably going to come off with your brake pads. Simply slide the pads out of the shims. Set those aside for now. I want to go ahead and separate our caliper bracket from the caliper itself using our 14mm socket. Loosen and remove these two bolts. Next thing we want to do, double check the slider pin grease. So we're going to grab these slider pins here, gently twist them and pull them out. And there's just a tiny bit of grease in there. We're just going to add just a little bit more. We don't want a ton on here, just enough to keep it lubricated. This side here has a rubber sleeve on it. Go ahead and work that back in, twist that and pop it in until you see that rubber boot reset onto that slider pin. Do the same on the other side. But what we're going to do is apply just a little bit of grease, thin coating. That's all you want. You don't want globs of grease on this here. Any excess grease, go ahead and wipe off. And take your new component, line that up, make sure that the spring is on the inboard side here. Push that down. Inspect all around, make sure that that is fully seated. Repeat this process for the other side. Now you can see as I press this on and the rotor flops back, go ahead and throw a lug nut on on the bottom. This will keep that rotor from flopping off. Makes it easier to put the caliper and bracket on. Take your caliper bracket, line that up, and go ahead and get your bolts installed. Now that we have our bolts started, go ahead and snug those down. Going to install your inboard pad. Press that in, make sure it's flush up against the brake rotor. I'm going to go ahead and install the outboard pad. Install your outboard pad, slide this in, get the top one started, and just kind of rotate that pad into place. Squeeze it in up against the rotor. Now what we want to do is disconnect our flex hose here from the old caliper. Then we're going to switch it over and put it onto the new caliper. You want to make sure that when you remove the bolt from this here, that you remove both of the washers. There's going to be one on the bolt side, on the head side, and one up against the caliper, like so. So make sure you remove both of those with the bolt. Then we're going to swap this over, put the bolt through the hose, pop it onto here, and thread this down and tighten it down. Now we are going to lose brake fluid from here, so you want to be careful when doing this. Have a drain bucket or a catch can underneath. Also pay attention here, there's a little notch, 2 ears with a notch in it, so the flex hose has a tab that lines up with that. Using our 12mm socket, loosen and remove. The crush washer fell off the inboard side. Remove the bolt, peel off that other washer. New bolt, washer, feed that through. New washer here. Get that started. You want to go ahead and tighten this down. This is an 11mm. Snug that down. Give it a wipe. Be careful not to drop the caliper with the flex hose attached to it like this. Wipe down the entire caliper. Get any of that residual brake fluid off. Go ahead and take your spring clips here, and these go into the holes on the top here. We have 2 on the bottom. 1 clip, 2 holes, and pop that in like so. Go ahead and slide this over. We'll go ahead and install our bolts here. Once that's caught a couple threads, you can go ahead and release that and then get that bottom one lined up. And we'll go ahead and snug those down. Using a 14mm socket, go ahead and snug these down. Torque down the flex hose bolt to 18 foot-pounds. Torque down the caliper bolts to 26 foot-pounds. Torque down the caliper bracket bolts to 88 foot-pounds. On the back side here, we have our bleeder screw. Now ours has a rubber cap on it. Go ahead and pop that cap off just by twisting it off, pop it off. If yours doesn't have the rubber cap, that's totally fine. Using a 10mm wrench, we're going to open up this bleeder screw and just bring it out a couple threads. Now what this is going to allow to happen is brake fluid is going to come down here, fill up the piston area in the back, and then start to come out. Once we see a steady stream of brake fluid here, we're going to tighten this down, and then we're going to proceed to our brake bleeding process. Now at this point here, you can see we have a steady amount of brake fluid coming out. Let's go ahead and close this down. Now we may not have to do the brake bleeding process. So what we'll do next, I'm going to straighten out our wheel, remove our lug nut that we had on the brake rotor itself. Our next step is we're going to check the brake fluid level up in the engine compartment, top that off as necessary. Then we're going to hop into the car, pump up that brake pedal. Now, if that brake pedal feels soft and spongy, we'll then go ahead and proceed to the brake bleeding process. But if that brake pedal feels nice and firm, we're going to go ahead and repeat this process for the passenger side if necessary, install your wheels, and then go for a road test. Now, if you did remove the little rubber cap from the brake bleeder screw, go ahead and simply pop that back on for now. That way you don't lose it. Good, take your wheel, line it up. Now if you have these center caps like this here, I want to go ahead and line this up. Ideally, you want to go ahead and get all of the lug nuts started by hand. And then once you have them all started, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Good, and torque down your lug nuts to 98 foot-pounds. You want to try and do this in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.